Thank you very much for inviting me to your conference. I'm sorry that I cannot be there in person, but I hope that my recorded talk will be helpful nonetheless. My talk is entitled Mattering, Wellness and Fairness, Foundations for Wellbeing Economies. My talk is divided into 5 parts: wellness, mattering, fairness, the interactions among these 3 components, and recommendations for well-being economies. My main thesis is that well-being economies should take into account conditions, experiences, and outcomes. Social and economic conditions have direct and indirect effects on outcomes. Conditions have to do with economy, social policy, resources, and the environment. Experiences have to do with our own sense of our lives. In other words, experiences have to do with how we process events in our lives. Finally, outcomes have to do with our own assessment of how our lives are going. Based on our own studies, I will argue that conditions of fairness lead to outcomes of wellness directly and indirectly. In a study with individuals, we found that experiences of mattering mediate between fairness and wellness. In other words, fairness leads to feelings of mattering, and these feelings in turn lead to outcomes of wellness. We're going to start with wellness. We're going to dig a little deeper into wellness and well-being. So wellness is multidimensional. My research team and I developed a model of well-being called ICOPE, which stands for interpersonal, community, occupational, physical, psychological, and economic well-being. And there is a lot of evidence that the various domains of well-being reinforce one another. So, for example, we know that economic, interpersonal, and occupational well-being improve physical and psychological well-being. In short, our definition of wellness is sustainable satisfaction of subjective and objective needs in ICOPE domains of life. I highlighted subjective and objective domains because both are important and complementary. Subjective needs include social support, self-determination, a sense of belonging. Objective needs include economic resources, healthcare, and shelter, for example. We now move to the second foundational pillar of well-being economies, mattering. One thing I learned living and working in various continents is that regardless of where you are, people have a need to matter. My definition of mattering is very simple: feeling valued and adding value. Well-being economies make sure all their citizens, regardless of age, class, gender, race, ethnicity, or disability status, feel valued and have opportunities to add value. We argue that mattering derives from feeling valued by self, others, work, and community, and from adding value to self, others, work, and community. When people in a community feel that they matter, they are more likely to experience self-compassion, autonomy, mastery, overall and physical well-being, self-acceptance, and many other important benefits that at the end of the day are going to save money because people are not going to incur a lot of cost in terms of healthcare or disability status. However, when people are not experiencing mattering, they develop psychological, organizational, and national problems. People who feel that they don't matter, they feel depressed, they feel disengaged at work when they are not being paid attention, when there aren't opportunities to add value. And when people feel disenfranchised, they often gravitate towards xenophobic and nationalistic movements. So we see now a rise in nationalism across the world. Now, often when citizens feel that they don't matter, they overcompensate and feel overvalued. They behave overvalued, producing negative effects such as narcissism, inequality, and environmental entitlement. Now, we're now in a position to explore the role of fairness in the common good model that we are proposing for well-being economies. So first, let me define fairness as the application of justice. Whereas justice is a moral principle, fairness is a moral practice. There are several types of fairness, such as distributive, procedural, and corrective fairness, which you can see on the slide. The first one entails distribution of resources. The second one, participation in processes affecting our lives. And the last one concerns restoring fairness after it has been violated. So in essence, the main definition of fairness is to each his or her due. And I maintain that well-being economies promote all these kinds of fairness. Now, I want to argue that the key mechanism underlying injustice is psychological injustice. This is based on the argument that we are all owed respect, dignity, and mattering. Our psychological due as human beings is mattering. Therefore, psychological injustice is a violation of the fundamental need to matter. So we're now in a position to examine interactions among the three aspects of the well-being economies. So in a study we recently published, we hypothesized that experiences of fairness would impact wellness directly through the yellow arrow and indirectly through worthiness, the blue arrows. What we found is that fairness affects wellness mostly indirectly through experiences of mattering. So experiences of fairness make me feel worthy and uphold my dignity, while instances of injustice make me feel inferior. We just saw that at the personal level, conditions of fairness affect wellness mostly indirectly through worthiness. My colleagues and I tested the same hypothesis at the international level. We compared over 40 countries and we found parallel measures in a social justice index and a measure of autonomy, social capital, and national satisfaction. So these are proxy measures for adding value, feeling valued, and wellness. And overall, the results show that social justice predicts life satisfaction or wellness directly through the yellow arrow and indirectly through social capital and autonomy, which are proxies for feeling valued and adding value, respectively. So let me now make three important recommendations. First, we have to invest in mattering, wellness, and fairness across domains of life. Number two, we have to invest in mattering, wellness, and fairness across the lifespan. And number three, we have to invest in objective and subjective aspects of mattering, wellness, and fairness. So we can see here that we have to invest in fairness at the inter-occupational, and communal levels. We have to invest in fairness that promote policies and practices that promote mattering, because in the end, they're going to lead to outcomes of wellness at the different levels. Finally, let me show you that if we invest in programs that make young children feel valued and teaches them how to add value, we can have a great return on investment These are some return on investments for different early childhood intervention programs. We know that for every dollar invested in prevention, we can get up to $17 in return. So it's very important to invest in mattering early in childhood. And my final point is that we have to invest in both subjective and objective domains of fairness, mattering, and wellness. Subjective have to do with how we feel, dignity, feeling valued, belonging. Objective investments have to do with resources such as shelter, adequate income, healthcare, and housing. So to conclude, it's important to remember that there is no wellness without fairness or worthiness in the well-being economies. Thank you very much.